things that I wish we had learned about very early on, simple concept that I wish we'd known from the start, is how to choose your tenant demographic. It's not something that's taught or talked about. It's something that we, eventually learned, hey, you know what? We really like this type of person in our properties. And so started to create that demographic for us. So what is a tenant demographic? So the definition of demographic is a particular sector of a population. So what is the sector of the population in your area that you would like to deal with? Now you can get really specific. And so we're going to ask you to do that at the end of this lesson. But for right now, just in general terms, for me, what I learned the hard way is that there's definitely a sector that I don't want to deal with. And I'm sure you can picture that one really quickly. But honing in on the sector that you do want to deal with is a little bit tougher. It's something you have to kind of stop and think about. So, when we first started buying our properties, we bought anything that would cash flow pretty much. So we would analyze it. We didn't even look at them. We would just analyze them. If they worked on paper and they cash flowed, even break even, because we didn't do it properly. We should have gone just for cash flow no matter what. But we thought, we make good money otherwise. In our previous business, we could sustain some negativity. Don't ever recommend doing that. But that's how we learn what not to do. So we bought anything that was break even or positive cash flow. So we ended up with this major cross section of properties types, which is great because we learned a ton about each type. We also ended up with them, in a major cross section of the city and in different, areas that had different industry. So, we got to learn a lot about our tenant demographics just by property managing. So we got to learn, that somebody that has really good income but not good credit didn't really work out well for us. We got to learn that people that have good credit but not great income, they did work out well for us. We learned that it doesn't matter whether you're blue collar or white collar. If you pay your bills, your credit's good, we know that that's a good tenant for us. And it didn't matter what industry they're in, what education level they have. What mattered is how they chose to live their lifestyle. So the segment of the population that we chose to really focus on were young families. Now the reason we did that was because in our market, we have a lot of blue collar workers that have families, but that are very highly paid. So often the family, the wife and kids, they stay home. They don't necessarily work outside the home in our area. So they're there full-time looking after the house and kids and the yard and, the flower beds and all those kinds of things. So that always, of course, worked really well. But yet we didn't have to give up income for that. So the family still made, $120,000, $130,000, $150,000 a year, even though they're only one income. So for us, that worked very, very well. We didn't need to have a certain type of industry or certain job or education level, because as long as they had good credit and good income, that was good for us. So, you can focus on whatever segment or whatever demographic you would like. You can focus on students. Now, let's break that down a little bit more. There's students that are first year students, and then there's students that are fourth year students, and then there's students that are professional students. So if you have a place that's you're going to be buying and you want to, focus on a university area because you want the student rental or student housing, remember that there's a whole other demographic in that area that is, professors and, visiting, I can't remember the word right now, but visiting professors that will come for, months at a time to work at different universities and schools. And they need places to stay, but they're definitely going to be in a different place than what your first and second year students are going to be in. So, if you can establish your tenant demographic at the beginning. Now, I know one investor that his demographic is anybody that is on social assistance that qualifies for a program that will give them first month's rent and damage deposit up front. Now, most of these people are on a very limited monthly income, and most of them don't have very good credit. He doesn't mind that because he's got a system in place that systematically gets them in there. He gets, damage deposit, first month's rent. If they don't pay the very next month, he has a very systematic way of having them out within a few days. The place cleaned up within a day, no matter how bad it is. And I've seen some of them that have been pretty bad that he's shown me. He has them cleaned up right away. And he has new people from that program in the next day. So he's kind of doubling up on rent. He's getting first month's rent and damage deposit, keeping the damage deposit from this guy. And then a few days later, first month's rent and damage deposit, keeping the damage. Now, it's completely legal. He can completely do that. Social services loves that he's at least open to allowing their people from the program in. Some of them work out well. And so those that do, he's also happy to have them as long-term tenants. But those that don't, he's not afraid to clear them out, move someone else in, and he's making more money by doing that, more cash flow. That's good for him. I don't have the stomach for that. I don't have the time for it. I couldn't kick somebody out that, is in that position, no matter how much they deserve it. Well, I could do it if I have to, but I don't want to do it. That's not what I want my job to be. So that is not the demographic for me in any way, shape, or form, even though he's going to make way more cash flow than I'm going to on the same place. In fact, we have properties all in the same complex. That's where we met. He makes way more money than I do on those properties, but that's okay because I'm sane. I have my sanity. So does he actually. He handles it really well and fairly and kindly and doesn't bother him. It would bother me. It would keep me up at night. So my tenant demographic is completely different than his. Sometimes for each house, in fact, often for each house, you may need to choose a tenant demographic. So in that complex, I'll give you an example of it is, a little bit of like maybe in a C neighborhood, but it's a B complex. So it's okay complex-wise, but the neighborhood and everything around, and it can attract some tougher demographics. So for that place, I have to bring my standards to a different level than I would on, some of our executive corporate homes that are furnished with, high-end furniture and that sort of thing. So each place can also be subscribed a tenant demographic. So I'll give you that example in that complex. Our demographic has changed through the years. We did have one gentleman, this was before I would never have probably let him in a property of mine. Just, he seemed super nice, but on the phone, I knew I probably wouldn't take him, but I didn't know how to say no in those days. I didn't have my systems in place on how to say no to somebody. So I let him come for a showing because I felt obligated. And when he walked up, just a rougher person than what I probably would put in my places, even though these places were a little bit rougher themselves. Inside were really nice. And I wanted them to stay that way. We'd renovated. So, but he came walking up, and the neighbors who were always outside, we renovated those places ourselves for the most part. So we were there for, a good 5 weeks. And they were literally always outside. They didn't work. They sat outside drinking and smoking, and super nice people, laughing and talking all the time, so friendly, offered to help us if they saw me carrying something, like good people. But really, loud music and laughing really loud, and always people, like the neighbors would all get home, drop off their stuff from work, grab a beer and head over and sit in their yard. So we realized really quickly we were going to have to make some adjustments in our demographic, because the person I wanted in that place probably would never stay. If they came and did a showing, seeing all that chaos there, wouldn't want to stay or even rent it. And I'd have a lot of tenant issues come up I'd have to be dealing with on a regular basis. And fighting between neighbors, that's never good. So on that place, I had to, open up to something I never probably would have before. That guy came walking up, said hello to me as he's opening the gate or whatever to come in the yard. Is a townhouse. And looked over and was like, hey buddy, how you doing? And, came in and saw the place. As we're leaving, they're talking, they're chatting, they're getting along, offered the guy a drink, like they got along great. So I was like, you know what? I think this is my new tenant. So, I did all my checks, everything. There was nothing saying I shouldn't take him. So I did. I had to not lower, I had to bring my standard to a different place because that individual unit had those neighbors. Like I stayed there for a couple years, never had a complaint about the neighbors, those neighbors eventually sold. So that's the other thing, they were owners. So it wasn't like anytime soon that was going to change. So they eventually did sell, but for those, 3 years or whatever that they were there, I would have had a lot of headaches. But instead, I had a super happy tenant that had buddies and friends the day he moved in. So, for each place, depending on what the situation is, you may need to adjust there as well. Funny other quick story, I have one place where the people always play loud music. Again, it's the owner's son. He's been there for as long as I've managed, which is probably 12, 13 years. He's probably never going anywhere. They always play loud music, always. And they're right next to other people. So when I had a guy that was deaf apply, I was like, this is your place. So I lowered rent for him by $100 a month just so that I could get him in there, because for the last 10 years, I've had complaints about the people. They're really nice people, but they love their music loud. And for some reason, the complex doesn't do anything about that. So, so now I've got him in there next door. He doesn't hear any of it, so it's perfect. Though I didn't have to lower my standards for him because he was great anyways, but I did lower my rent just to get him in there so that my headaches were gone away. So you can set your tenant demographic as a whole. I'm going to focus on families that are between the ages of 25 and 40 and have, 2 or 3 kids that are under the age of 10 and make $120,000 to $150,000, $120,000 to $150,000 a year. That's my demographic. So, you can set that. And then for each place, you might also, depending on your portfolio, you might also have to set a demographic. Now, when you set that demographic for each place, you're then going to say, okay, every time I buy a place, who do I want in there? Who do I want to be talking to on the phone? Who do I want to be dealing with on a regular basis? Who do I want, my life to be in service to? Because these are your tenants. They are paying you a lot of money. You are providing them a service. You are in service to them. So who do I want to be in service to? And if you create that demographic, then every single time you buy a property, that's who you're going to have in mind. Now, would they buy this property or would they rent this property from me? What would I have to do to get them to rent this property from me? So in your buying, you're going to be looking at, are there parks and spray parks and, rec centers and skate parks and amenities like that in the area that families are going to want to have. Daycares or good schools, those kinds of things. You're going to be looking at that. You're going to be looking at, once you do buy the place, let's say it's in the right area, now you're going to be looking at staging it for the right people. Is there a quiet playroom? Like lots of people use a dining room. They have like a separate little dining room area. What we've done before is close that off with a door so it can be used as an office instead of a dining room, because we find tenants that don't necessarily use that as much. So we close it off, and instead of, having a dining room, they have either an office or a playroom that's right off of the kitchen, but yet, moms can not go crazy listening to the noise all day long and keep messes contained. So, do you buy for and then plan for and then stage for these types of tenants? Do they want granite? Do they not care about granite? Do they want hardwood floors or do they want the cozy carpet in the bedrooms? I find our older ones, our older tenant demographic, kind of seniors, they like carpets in the bedroom still. So if that's who I'm catering to and that's who I want in that property, that's the type of things and decisions I'm going to make. So your tenant demographic goes beyond just your overall view of who you want to deal with. It goes specific to properties, and then it goes into, the rental of those properties. You're going to advertise on the sites and places that those people do. There's senior magazines even that you can advertise places for rent in if that's your demographic. Websites, of course, are for more the younger generation and families. Then paint colors. What kind of paint colors do they like or want? So you're going to definitely, cater to that. Amenities, things like granite and, water in the fridge or stainless, or do they not care? Do they want finished basements? Do they need yards? Are you catering to people that have pets? If they have pets, they want a yard, maybe, for dogs, obviously. So you get your tenant demographic in your mind, and then you're going to buy for, stage for, advertise for, and rent to that demographic, all of those things in line. So use the worksheet that's accompanying this lesson to set that demographic again very broadly at first, and then you can also do it by property as well. Every time you buy a property, you can review, print off this worksheet, and review what kind of tent do I want to see in this home. That is a tip that for me, if I had had that, I think our investing would have gone a lot smoother for the first few years. I wouldn't be able to speak to it as I do today, I guess, but remember, just choose what sector of the population you want to service and then serve them really, really well.